Greetings and welcome to another Diamond Dave retrospective in which I, Diamond Dave, shall be reviewing my work on YouTube. In this Diamond Dave retrospective, I shall be reviewing my 2013 film, The Chase. Now, like Big Bad Dave, The Dark Path, this film, The Chase, was a piece of HND coursework. It was a practical piece for the High National Diploma in Creative Media Production that I was doing at the time. I've mentioned this course that I was doing in previous retrospectives. So I was in my second and final year of college studying film at higher education. And just like with the first year of this course, one of my big assignments for my coursework was to submit a practical film on top of loads of other things. I mentioned in my Big Bad Dave retrospective that in this HND I had a lot to do at the time, as well as just making the film, which I also felt impacted on the quality of the final product. So I was in my final year of college, and our course was not based on exams. Thankfully, we didn't have exams on this course, but it was all evaluated entirely on coursework, both theory and practical. So for this final year of college that I was doing, I had to do two documentary films, two documentary pieces, and one fiction. So on top of having to do two documentary pieces and writing all the theory crap, I also had to do this practical piece, which was supposed to be fiction. Now, in the first year of this HND, when it came to coming up with an idea for my practical piece, I had an advantage in which I already had an idea of what I wanted to do for my fiction piece of coursework, because Big Bad Dave, the prequel, The Dark Path, was already in my mind for a couple of years before I started the High National Diploma, and I used this HND as a means to tell that prequel story that I had been wanting to make for about 2 years. But unfortunately, this time in 2013, when it came round to doing the practical coursework, this time I didn't actually have a concept or an idea for my fiction piece of coursework. So I did talk about pros and cons about making films in academic circumstances. The pros are that you're indefinitely going to do it because you don't have a choice, and you're on the same boat as your classmates because they all want to make their own films too, and by extension, they will help you as a class. You'll help each other out by either acting in each other's films or helping them behind the scenes with the camera and technical stuff. But there are cons as well, in which you're limited to what you can do because of deadlines. Deadlines are the worst. So I was sort of rushed to try and think of a story or a concept or a basis for this film. So eventually I decided to settle on the concept of a big chase sequence that will lead up to some punchline or big anti-climax at the ends for comedic purposes. One of my favourite scenes of all time in film is in Point Break, the chase scene in Point Break, in which Keanu Reeves chases the bad guy through different streets and suburban areas in a very intense fight scene where the bad guy is wearing a Ronald Reagan mask. and that was actually one of the scenes that I watched that inspired me to get into film. I really wanted to do a story involving characters, which is sort of my forte in my work. My work is usually based around good versus evil, protagonist versus antagonist, etc., etc. But because I was sort of rushed into a deadline, we only had a couple of months to do not only our films but all the theory stuff as well. I just decided to take a very basic approach and put premise first before plot. The premise and setting being that this is going to be a chase, a film about a big chase, and then I can think about the plot or lack thereof later as I make it. So I just went for this very simple approach just to save myself time and stress, because I had a lot to do at the time. I had a lot of theory work to do, a lot of film analysis to type up on, and I also had 2 documentary pieces to produce, as well as a third film. So we were all a little bit rushy to get all of our work done. And thankfully I was lucky enough to be in a class that consisted of other like-minded individuals such as myself who were very passionate to get their coursework done. So I got friends of mine from class who, at the same time they were working on their own films, I recruited my fellow classmates to help me in my own film, to act in it and to be my camera man. So in this film, because it was supposed to be a big, long, exaggerated chase sequence, I wanted to throw in every possible practical gag that I could imagine, just to really make it this very intense chase scene, but at the very end lead up to something completely far-fetched. But I'll expand on that later on in this review. Also, because this film was made in academic circumstances and I was being evaluated on the techniques that I was using in terms of shooting it and editing it, I also sort of had to put filmmaking techniques first before actually telling the story. I was being marked and evaluated on how it was shot and the different techniques we utilised in order to make it. So, in a very rare circumstance for me, I had to put technique before plot and story, because as I've said in my previous retrospectives, story and plot for me is the most important elements for making a film. But in this case, I had to put technique first before story in order to get myself good points so I could pass the course, which I did, thankfully. So there, because of the nature of the film, because there's a lot of movement in it and panning and tracking shots in order to shoot this whole big chase sequence, we used a lot of Steadicam and GoPros, like the type of devices that they used in The Shining, Stanley Kubrick. We used these GoPros and Steadicams to really capture the atmosphere of this being a chase scene. So this is The Chase, and it was uploaded on the 23rd of May 2013. So that's the setup for the film. Basically, I go out to the local shop just for a wee bit of shopping, and the guy who actually ran that small corner shop was very kind to allow us to briefly film inside just for the sake of telling the story. So anyway, the plot is I go for a wee trip to the shop, bump into this guy on my way out, and then for some reason he's suddenly chasing after me. Why is he doing it? Nobody knows. But if you look at this very brief clip just here, that is relevant to the plot. So that brief shot there will be is sort of the pivotal vocal point for the reason behind why this guy is chasing me, and ultimately how the film will end. Also, in this film, for a film about a guy who's just going for a trip to the shop and ending up being chased, I am dressed unusually formally. I mean, how many people would put on a three-piece suit just to go to the local shop? Well, I sort of dressed like that because I love to wear three-piece suits, and I just like dressing like that. I like to dress smartly, even though in this particular film I wasn't really playing a baddie or a gangster like I do in my other films. I wasn't really playing a big major villain, so I didn't really need to dress in a three-piece suit or dress so smartly, but I just decided to anyway, even though the film didn't really demand for such a dress sense. In fact, the purple shirt I wear in this film is the exact same shirt that I wore years previously in Goths and Chavs. It's the same purple shirt I wore in Goths and Chavs. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there because it was a special shirt for me personally, because I wore it in one of my most successful earliest films on YouTube. And a funny story as well. As I've said, me and my classmates were all on the same boat. We were all making our own films simultaneously. And depending on our different skills, we were asking each other to help in each other's respective projects. So a classmate would help me in my film, and vice versa, I would help them in their films. So on this same day that we were filming the chase, one of my other classmates decided to join us because he wanted me to act in a very brief scene for his film. So it was me, Matthew Diamond, who plays the guy who's chasing after me, Sam Orr, who did the camera stuff for me. Sam Orr was my cameraman. So there were the three of us, me, Matthew, and Sam, to work on this film, my film, The Chase. But another classmate of mine, Scott Loney, decided to tag along to help as well. But he also joined us because he wanted me to shoot a very brief scene in my house in which I'm talking on the telephone to a character in his film. So dressing up in a three-piece suit on that particular day that I chose to do the chase was actually quite good in two ways, because Scott needed somebody to play sort of a gangster-esque character for his film, and because I was wearing this three-piece suit at the time, he asked me before we started shooting my film The Chase if I could quickly do a brief scene for his project. So I was happy to oblige him. It was basically just a brief scene of me talking on the phone to a character from his film. So if you look out for it, it is called Holiday in Hell, and it is done by Scott Loney. You will see it in a playlist on my channel called Other Productions that I have been involved in. So if you take a look at that, check that out to look for my brief cameo in that film. But I digress. This is about my film, The Chase. As you can see so far, I deliberately wanted to replicate that chase scene from Point Break that I was talking about earlier, the big chase between Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, whenever Patrick is dressed up like Ronald Reagan and they're running through all these streets. That is exactly what I had in my mind when I was making this film, and I told Sam Moore, the cameraman, how I wanted the camera to capture us as we were running through the different streets. And those brief couple of shots at the beginning of the actual chase was in a neighbourhood that I had filmed in previously a very long time ago for Street Hero. At the end, whenever my friend Danny chases me as Big Bad Dave, we used that same street that I had already used a few years previously in Street Hero. There's a lot of what I like to call world building in this film, which I have mentioned in previous videos. When you're making a film, you can just build whatever world you want, because there are different areas that we shot in in the film it looks as if they are connected to each other, whereas in reality they're actually in different parts of town. In fact, we actually shot a little bit of this film in another town just a few miles down the road from where I live, but we made it look as if it was part of the same town that the chase is set in. So unless you live where I live, you shouldn't be able to tell that we were filming in completely different locations. But that's one of the magic wonders of filmmaking, world building. You get to build your own little world. Take one area from somewhere, take an area from another, which in reality is in a different place, and you can put them together to make it look as if they are connected. Now, there's a shot that I am really appreciative of. That's bits that I'm running up the alley way, and Sam was using the Steadicam, and he did it. He was so good at being my cameraman on this. I basically told him the gist of what I wanted in a particular shot, and he was very good at fulfilling my wishes and what I asked of him. So he had this steady cam that he sort of wore round his chest and shoulders, and he has the camera out like this on a wee steady cam handle, and he was just following me using this steady cam, which gave a very smooth gliding motion in order to follow both me and Maddie as we were running. Because if he was to do it just handheld, it would be all shaky. But because he had this steady cam with him and the way he was able to use it, it gave a perfect gliding motion for the chase, with little to absolutely no shaking at all. And I just love that bit that I stop and I look around briefly in my surroundings, and he rotates around me until I'm off screen and shows Maddie running up the alleyway following me. And then there's this very brief few seconds worth of the camera gliding further down the alley, even though both me and Maddie were now off screen. I remember my lecturer, my tutor in this course, asking, do you really want to keep those last few seconds in of that shot? Because there's nobody there now, both you and Maddie are off screen. And I said, I actually want to keep that in. I want to keep those last extra seconds of that particular shot in, of just the camera gliding slowly after me and Maddie have ran off screen. There was something I felt that was quite artistic about it that I wanted to keep it in. Okay, so there's quite a lot to talk about this particular portion of the film. So we're running up the dual carriageway, and then I turn it round the corner, and then all of a sudden I'm in a different town. This is what I was talking about, world building. I don't know how obvious it looks, but that's cut there whenever I turn the corner where the hedge is and I suddenly appear from an alleyway amongst a few houses. We did, that was jumped, that we went to another town a few miles down the road to record that scene that I find a car and get into it. So again, worlds building, taking different areas, even two completely different towns even, and splicing them together to give that smoke and mirrors illusion, that effect that this is all taking place within the same town area, etc., etc. I do think it is quite obvious when you jump from us on the dual carriageway and then it's suddenly me running out into a car park in a separate town a few miles down the road. I think it is a bit obvious, but it's in the eye of the beholder. Now, I wanted to throw in a car sequence because I wanted to really exaggerate the nature of the chase and throw in any gag that I could possibly think of to make the chase more and more and more far-fetched and over exaggerated in order to build up to the climax, that my character's so desperate to try and escape from this guy who's chasing after him that I would stoop as far as to nicking a car, stealing a car and driving off in it, and then him to do the exact same thing. I remember my teacher who ran the course was sort of asking me, could you possibly find a way to put the cars in the film from a narrative point of view? Because the film starts with me walking from my house to the local shop. It didn't really make a lot of sense from a storytelling point of view as to why the cars were there and why my character was able to get into it and use it to drive off, and the same for Maddie to suddenly acquire a car like I did and use it to chase me. And I kept trying to think, how could I put this into a story? How could this make sense that these two men who are chasing after each other, how could they possibly have access to two conveniently placed cars in a car park, and it's implied that the cars aren't even theirs because, as I says in the beginning of the film, I walk to the shop from my house. I don't drive there. So why do I suddenly have a car now during this chase to get away from the guy? But in the end, me and my teacher sort of agreed on that it was just a visual gag, really, even though it doesn't make sense from a storytelling point of view as to why these two men suddenly had these cars to use. In the end, it didn't really matter because the film, in terms of its story, is so simplistic anyway. Because I was putting technique first, prioritizing filmmaking techniques first before actual story, we just thought it was okay and acceptable just to put the cars in as a sight gag and just to create more fancy filmmaking opportunities to film the cars driving down, chasing each other, and just to add on extra sight gags to the chase. Now, I don't drive in real life, I don't drive at all. So we pulled off a couple of tricks for it. So it shows me unlocking the car. How did I get the keys for this car in the film? We don't know, but it doesn't matter because it's more of an technique and art film as opposed to a film with an actual story. But I digress. It shows me unlocking the car, I climb into it, and I start the ignition, and then it suddenly cuts to the car driving off, and then Maddie jumping into his car. So what we did was by the way, the cars that we used in this film belonged to both Sam, my cameraman, and Maddie, the guy who was chasing after me. So Sam and Maddie very kindly lent their cars into the film for the film's sake. So after it cuts from me sitting in the car with the ignition starting, and then it cuts to the car driving off, what we did was I took reins of the camera. I went outside and shot the two cars driving off, and it was actually Sam who got into his own car to pretend to be me, sitting in the car being the driver and driving off. Because, as I've said, I don't drive, so Sam was sort of my stunt double, if you will, or my driver double. So it cuts from me sitting in the driver's seat, and then it suddenly shows the car being driven off by Sam, the cameraman, even though it's supposed to be my character in the car. But you don't see that. It's not that obvious when you look at it at all because you can't see through the window who's driving the car. But even if you did, even if you were able to see, it doesn't really matter because me and Sam do not look dissimilar in appearance. We both have fair hair, we both have beards, and we both wear glasses. So Sam actually does look a bit like me. So it was very easy to pass off as if it was me driving the car instead of him. And Mary was able to drive his own car anyway, so we didn't need to worry about that. So we cut to the two cars driving along the dual carriageway, and it shows one angle of Sam pretending to be me driving his blue car down the road, then quickly followed by Maddie, and then it suddenly cuts to the opposite angle, showing the rear of the two cars driving, Sam's car and Maddie's car. what we did for that one is that for those two shots there, vroom from one end and then vroom from the next end. I got Sam and Maddie to get into their cars, and drive down the dual carriageway. But before we did that, me and Sam set up two cameras. We had two cameras for the chase, so we set each camera on a little stand to face both ways, one camera looking this way and the other camera looking that way. And before they got into their cars, we hit the record button. So we both had two cameras sitting propped up at the sides of the road, with one camera facing one direction and the other camera facing the opposite direction, just so we could record those two different shots simultaneously, just to make the whole process easier and quicker to achieve. So that was that little trick. You see that one angle of the two cars coming down the dual carriageway, and then you see the other angle from the rear. Those two shots were both filmed at the exact same time as each other, as we had both cameras propped at the side of the road facing the two opposite directions, recording at the same time. So it just made the whole process easier to achieve. And for the shots from inside the cars, I basically sat in the back seat with the camera and recorded Maddie driving, and then I went into Sam's car and went in the back and recorded outside his back window to show Maddie chasing my car. Well, Sam's car in reality, but in this film it's mine. And it cuts to my foot on the accelerator. So yeah, that was that segment of the film, and it was actually surprisingly much easier to film than I first imagined it to be, given that we had a lot of practical work to do in order to film two cars chasing after one another down a dual carriageway, and trying to splice all these different shots in between to make it look as if that I was driving and Maddie was chasing me, but it was Sam who was actually driving the car that I was supposed to be driving. So here's the last part of the film. So this is me getting out of the car after Sam parked it, to give that illusion that I was actually driving. Here we are on the beach, and world building, as I say, we suddenly cut to another part of town. I really like this shot here, right here. Sam propped the camera up very high, at a very high angle, so it looks a bit like a CCTV camera clip. The way it was shot, it looks like CCTV footage, that bit of me running through the gate. And here is quite a literal cliffhanger. I'm at the edge. What's going to happen next? Am I going to escape?
You dropped this?
Thanks, mate. Thanks indeed. Okie dokie, so regarding the ending for this film, I needed help to sort of come up with a climax of sorts or an anticlimax. Again, because because of the circumstances I was in when I was making this film, I didn't have a lot of time to make a proper story out of this, and because of that, I had to put technique first before the actual plot. So it wasn't until halfway through filming that I had to start thinking of a narrative ending to this chase. So I got great help from my teacher, my lecturer, who was brilliant at taking the course. I went up to him and said, I've got this chase going on, but I don't know how to finish it. I don't know how to finish the film. And at the beginning, I point out there's a very important clip of me brushing past Maddie as I'm walking out of the shop, and that clip that we brush past each other is important to the ending. So my teacher took a look at that clip, and it was he who came up with the idea of this double twist ending. Originally, I thought I'll just end it that he gives me the money just to say, you drop this. And that was the whole reason why he chased after me. That it came across as threatening that he was chasing after me, but it was literally just a misunderstanding that I dropped my money and he wanted to give it back to me after a very elaborate chase scene. That was the joke. But it was my teacher who suggested to me, why don't you have this double twist ending that although it looked as if that I was innocent all along and that this guy was just trying to give me my money back, my teacher suggested, why don't you do it that it was me? Why don't you make it look as if that it was you who pickpocketed him while I was brushing past him, that I pickpocketed him and stole his wallet in secret as we were brushing past each other. And as I was putting the money back in my own wallet, I would produce his wallet, my chaser's wallet, to show that all along I was the baddie and that I had pickpocketed him, and that's why I was trying to escape. But he was clearly oblivious to the fact that I had pickpocketed him. So that was a very clever idea on my teacher's part to give the chase that twist ending, that it may have looked as if that the guy was just chasing me to return my money, which that's part of the ending, but it was my teacher who came up with this other part of the ending, that it may come across that it was all innocent and I was just running away from him because I was scared and he was just giving me my money back. It was that very clever idea on my teacher's part to show that all along I had been running away from him because I had secretly nicked his wallet whenever we brushed past each other at the beginning of the film. And it's only at the very end that my pursuer realizes that his wallet is missing, and I have that sinister look on my face to show that I stole his wallet and it's mine now. I now have my own wallet, but I also have his as well. So how was I going to get out of this one? Well, we decided to go completely ambiguity. My pursuer turns round and sees that I'm completely gone. I vanished. So was I some sort of a magician? was I able to disappear at will or teleport away so that he couldn't find out that I had nicked his wallet? Or did I just throw myself into the sea to swim away and to get away? I remember my teacher sort of joking at the time after he saw the ending, after he suggested that I ended the film this way and I showed him the footage. He actually laughed and just sort of turned to me and said, well, the only practical thing you could have done was to just throw yourself into the sea and swim away because I disappeared. But it's ambiguous whether I had magical abilities to teleport away or if I just threw myself into the sea and swam away. So that was that. So now for the final reflections of the chase. Well, it is what it is. It's a very simple film, not much of a plot going on, but I really loved the technical side of it and how we were able to shoot it. And Sam was very cooperative and very good at listening to me whenever I told him how I wanted a certain sequence to be shot. And he supplied all the technical supplies to help achieve those great shots and panning gliding motions. He brought the Steadicam with him. If I remember correctly, he owned the Steadicam, it was his, and he was able to strap it on to himself and prop the camera on and just follow both Maddie and myself. So he was brilliant at being able to capture what I had envisioned using the Steadicam and really giving that chase look. As I said in the beginning of the review, this film was very heavily inspired from that scene from Point Break in which Keanu Reeves chases Patrick Swayze dressed as Ronald Reagan through the different streets and suburbs. This film was a deliberate homage to that scene, which I really liked. And it was part of my coursework of my HND. This was my second and final year of my High National Diploma, and this film, along with my two documentary pieces and all my theory work, I was able to pass, and I graduated in August of that year. So I look back on this film with very happy memories. I really enjoyed my 2 years at college pursuing my film studies at a higher education. It was a wonderful 2 years, and I met very great people who I'm still friends with to this day. And I also want to give my own personal shout out and gratitude to my teacher, Raymond Denver, who took the course for 2 years and taught me everything I know now. I had knowledge of movie making whenever I started the course, but I learned so much more during the 2 years that I spent in this HND. So I give my shout out to Raymond Denver. He was my lecturer on the course and helped me through those 2 enjoyable but very hard-working years. So, Raymond Denver, if you're listening, my utmost thanks. You were my lecturer, you were my teacher, and you were my friend. And without you, I could not have graduated from this HND. And I had a very good 2 years, made some good new friends, and had lots of fun making new films for my channel. So that was The Chase. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you liked it, please subscribe to my channel and follow me on Twitter. Now, I am going to continue doing my Diamond Dave retrospectives, but I'm uncertain as to what I'm going to review next, because 2014 and 2015 were difficult years for my channel. They're sort of what I call the wilderness years, because I didn't really make a lot of content. I did make videos in 2014 and 2015, but I'm not sure whether the videos from that particular era bear enough substance for me to be able to make a proper review out of. So while I cannot guarantee what I'm going to review next, I can assure you that my retrospectives will continue, because I still have a lot more work and films over the past few years to review. It's only 2014 and 2015 that will be difficult to pick a film out to review. But my retrospectives will continue, because in 2016 I come back full time, so to speak, and make films on a much more regular basis again. So the retrospectives will continue, because I have a lot more of my own work to review. It's just those two difficult years, 2014 and 2015, to figure out what to review next. So in the meantime, take care and be lucky.